Hi, welcome to Drift Stories. Tonight, I will tell my own story. I am Shanghai, but you should call me by another name, the port. I have stood where the Huangpu River meets the Yangtze for 1,300 years. Now, close your eyes. Let your breath follow the tide. Slowly rise, then slowly fall. The tide comes twice a day. Once at midnight, once at noon, never off by more than a quarter of an hour. The moon pulls it here. The moon walks slowly across the sky. The tide follows slowly across the earth. Can you feel it? Not the crashing of ocean waves, but the Huangpu River's thick, slow push. When the tide rises, water pours back in from the Yangtze estuary, carrying silt and the salt taste of distant seas, inch by inch, spilling over the mud flats by the shore. When the tide recedes, the water slowly withdraws into the Yangtze, like a person letting out a long, slow breath. I breathe every day, twice a day, for 1,300 years, never missing a single breath. Tonight, you rest your head upon my tide. Let me show you the ships that have come to my wharves. Close your eyes, slowly sink beneath the surface. You are sinking, not the sudden falling kind of sinking, but like a sycamore leaf landing on the water, then slowly, slowly being soaked through, being held by the water. You are in my water now. My water is not deep. The Huangpu River reaches no more than a dozen meters at its deepest. But it is thick, not in depth, but in density. 1,300 years of silt rest on the riverbed, layer upon layer, like a book steeped in water. Every grain of sand once came from somewhere, some from Lake Tai, drifting all the way down the Suzhou Creek, some from farther away, carried by the Yangtze from the Shanghai Tibet Plateau, traveling 6,300 kilometers before settling here with me. Your body is light. The water holds you up. The water is cool, not the cold kind of cool, but the cool of dipping your feet into well water on a summer evening. Cool enough that every muscle in your body loosens one by one. You do not need to hold your breath. The water will breathe for you. You can hear the water, not with your ears, but with your skin. A very low, very deep frequency, like someone in the distance beating a great drum covered with thick cloth. That is the tide pushing against my riverbed. You do not need to move. The water will carry you. Let us drift downstream to see the first wharf from 1,300 years ago. You are in the Tang Dynasty now. Back then, I was not yet called Shanghai, and the Huangpu River was not yet the river it is today. Wusong River was the main channel, flowing from Lake Tai all the way to the East China Sea. During the Tianbao era of the Tang Dynasty, there was a place called Qinglong Town by the Wusong River. That was my first wharf. Back then, the Wusong River was wider than the Huangpu River is now, the water a bluish gray, and on clear days you could see the pebbles at the bottom. Qinglong Town took its name from the river. The water moved like a green dragon, slowly twisting its body across the plain. The wharf was not large, a few dozen boats moored by the shore, mostly tribute barges, from Yangzhou, from Suzhou, from Hangzhou, their holds filled with grain and cloth. The tribute barges were flat-bottomed with wide hulls and shallow drafts. The Wusong River was never deep to begin with, and only at high tide could slightly larger boats pass through. The workers on the wharf went barefoot, the soles of their feet wearing down the wood grain over decades until the planks turned smooth. Their carrying poles were bamboo, creaking with every load they lifted. Goods unloaded from the boats piled up on the shore like little hills. Rice sacks stamped with the official seal of Yangzhou Prefecture. Bolts of cloth still carrying the camphor wood scent of the Suzhou Weaving Bureau. Back then, I was only a very small wharf. So small that you cannot even find the name Qinglong Town on any map today. But I am not in a hurry. A port is never in a hurry. A port only waits. The nights at Qinglong Town were very quiet. By day, the boats had all gone, or lay moored by the shore asleep. Only one lamp remained on the wharf. Not a lantern, but an oil lamp, set on a stone block by the water. The flame was no bigger than a soybean, flickering in the river wind, but never going out. The night wind pressed the flame very low, so low you thought it would die. Then the wind stopped, and the flame stood back up, a little brighter than before. A pleasant smell hung over the wharf, not the scent of flowers, but the smell of wet wood and river water mixed together, a little sweet, a little briny. The old night watchman walked from one end of the wharf to the other, his wooden clapper sounding only once in a long while. Not because he was slacking off, but because the night was so long, too long to need dividing with a clapper. When he reached the river's edge, he would stop and look at the water. The surface was black, but unevenly black. When the moon hid behind clouds, the water was a solid block of ink. When the moon came out, the surface split open with a silver crack, stretching from this shore all the way to the other. There was nothing on the other shore. Pudong in the Tang Dynasty was all mudflats, the reeds taller than a person. And when the wind blew, the reed tassels swayed like a white wave, even lovelier than the waves on the river. The old watchman looked at the water for a while, then walked on. His footsteps on the planks were very light, like the sound of the river lapping gently at the shore. That sound is still here, 1,300 years later. I can still hear his footsteps, hidden beneath my riverbed, pressed down softly by layer after layer of silt. Several hundred years passed. The Wusong River slowly silted up, not all at once, but year by year, inch by inch. Silt washed down from lake tide, piling into sandbars along the lower Wusong, making it harder and harder for boats to enter. But water never has only one path. A small tributary south of the Wusong, with a swifter current and a deeper channel, grew wider and wider instead. That river is what we now call the Huangpu. In the late Song and early Yuan, a new wharf was built on the west bank of the Huangpu called Shanghai Town, right where Shiliupu stands today. Unlike Qinglong Town, the wharf at Shanghai Town faced a new kind of ship, the Sanjiang. At the time, Shanghai was only a small town under Songjiang Prefecture. No one imagined that a few centuries later it would become a city. The town wharf was not large either, but its location was good, right at the bend of the Huangpu. The water slowed down here, like a traveler stopping to drink. Listen to the name, Sanjiang. It was invented right here in Shanghai. Flat-bottomed, square-bowed, with an extremely shallow draft, designed specifically for the ever-shifting sandbars at the mouth of the Yangtze. Other boats would run aground on the sandbars. The sand junk slid right over them, its hull scraping against the sand with a soft shushing sound, like someone far away turning the pages of a very thick book. The boatmen stood at the bow punting, barefoot on the deck boards, the muscles in their legs taut and defined. They needed no compass. They read the trees on the bank, the color of the river, the clouds in the sky. They were old friends of mine. The sand junk set sail, not for the open ocean, but along the coastline. From Shanghai to Tianjin, from Tianjin to Yingkou, sometimes as far as Dengzhou in Shandong. They carried nothing precious, just Jiangnan cotton, Songjiang cloth, Suzhou embroidery. The sand junks were slow. With a fair wind, they covered 100 li a day. Against the wind, they could only wait. While waiting for the wind, the boatmen mended sails on deck, repaired their punting poles, and boiled a pot of fish soup with plenty of ginger. The briny scent of the soup mingled with the briny scent of the river. Impossible to tell which breath was sea wind and which was stove fire. The sea was not rough every day. Most of the time, the surface lay flat, like a sheet of blue-gray silk spread open. The sand junk glided over it, the bow cutting a white slit across the silk, and the slit healed over almost at once. Seagulls trailed behind the boat, not to feed. Simply curious where this great wooden bird was headed. You lie in the hold. The hull sways gently from side to side, not pitching, but rocking like a cradle. Through a crack in the planks overhead, a thread of daylight slips in, very thin, very fine. You watch that thread of light turn from white to gray, from gray to dark. Night has fallen. After dark, the boatmen fall silent. Only the sound of the bow cutting through the sea remains. Not a splashing sound, something lower, more drawn out, like a person breathing in the darkness at a very slow rhythm. The sand junk drifts farther from the shore, the lights on land becoming a thin golden thread in the distance. And then that thread too sinks into the sea. A port produces nothing. A port does not weave cloth, does not grow rice, does not fire porcelain. A port only lets things pass through, but a port remembers everything that passes through. I remember the tea from Fujian, not the loose-leaf tea of today, but tea pressed into solid cakes, wrapped in bamboo leaves, and then coated in oiled paper. The tea cakes piled up on the wharf, their cool, bitter fragrance detectable from 20 feet away. I remember the porcelain from Jiangxi, Jingizhen blue and white, each piece wrapped 3 times in straw rope and packed into wooden barrels. The barrels marked with the words, "Handle with care" on the outside. The boatmen held their breath even as they carried them. I remember the silk from Beijing. Whole bowls of satin, the color as deep as ripe mulberries. The women inspected the goods on the wharf, shaking the satin open and holding it up to the sunlight, and the satin gleamed with a luster like flowing water. These goods only stayed with me for a few days. When the next ship arrived, they were loaded back on and taken away. Some went north to Tianjin, some went south to Quanzhou, some crossed the seas to places I do not know. I remember the weight of every piece of cargo, not the weight measured by a scale, but the weight borne on the shoulders of the dock workers. a sack of rice bending a carrying pole, a barrel of tung oil making the gangplank creak 3 times. A port never possesses anything. A port only lets things rest here for a moment, but everything that has rested here has left behind a very light, very faint mark in my water. The wharf was not busy every day. When it rained, the wharf grew lazy. The rain in Qinglong is not the pelting rain of the north. It is fine, dense, like flour sifted through a sieve. Rain fell on tung-oiled cloth. Rolls of it were stacked under the eaves of the warehouse, and the rain struck them with a muffled, soft pattering. The boat canopies were also covered with tung-oiled cloth, and rainwater dripped from the edges, drop by drop onto the river, each drop raising a tiny circle that was carried away by the current. Vanishing, then another drop came. The workers sheltered under the warehouse eaves, squatting or sitting on burlap sacks, smoking, not speaking, watching the rain. On rainy days, the river water was yellower than usual. More mud washed down from upstream. A thin layer of mist floated over the river, turning the reed beds on the opposite bank into a blurred shadow. Distant boats in the mist became mere outlines, their masts like a single light brushstroke of ink on rice paper. Occasionally, a small boat rowed slowly across the river. The boatman wore a palm bark rain cape, the palm leaves soaked through to a dark brown, the rainwater streaming down the edges in very fine threads. He paid the rain no mind. A man who had spent half his life on the wharf had long stopped caring about rain. It was so quiet on the wharf, you could hear the rainwater dripping from the eaves onto the flagstone. Not a rapid patter, but something slower. A drop, a long pause, then another drop. The quiet of the wharf on a rainy day was a thick kind of quiet. So thick you felt time itself had stopped to take shelter from the rain with you. By the Ming Dynasty, Shiliupu had become the liveliest place on my body. Hundreds of sand junks moored bow to stern on the river, stretching from Shiliupu all the way to Dongjiadu for miles on end. The gap between boats was no wider than a mooring rope. A boatman crossing from one deck to the next did not even need to jump, just took a casual step. Fires were lit at the bows for cooking. Smoke rose at once from the bows of hundreds of boats, white smoke drifting low over the water, and from a distance it looked as though a field of white reeds had grown across the river. The fragrance of cooking, the smell of smoke, the briny scent of the river all mingled together. That was the smell of my wharf. The people on the wharf, the porters, the boatmen, the warehouse owners, the merchants inspecting goods, the vendors selling flatbread. Their voices blended into a single hum, not loud but dense, like the chirping of insects on a summer night. The porter's work chants had the steadiest rhythm. Heave, ho, 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 one beat to every step. Their carrying poles bending into an arc across their shoulders. There was a special order on the wharf. Everyone was busy at once, but no one got in anyone else's way. They had spent their whole lives on the wharf, and every plank under their feet had a spot that belonged only to them. The holds were full of cargo, the boats riding low in the water, the gunwales barely a foot above the surface. The boatmen stood at the bow and pushed off from the neighboring boats with bamboo poles, the pole entering the water with a soft pop like pulling a cork from a bottle. Every day new boats came, old boats left. The port never closes its doors. After dusk, the boats no longer left port. There were sandbars at the Yangtze estuary, invisible in the dark, so the sand junks moored by the shore at night to wait for dawn. Hundreds of boats fell quiet on the river, and the lamps in their cabins lit up one by one. Not bright glaring lamps, but oil lamps. Their soybean-sized flames leaking through the gaps in the canopies, becoming small pools of warm yellow light. Hundreds of boat lamps lit up across the river, not in neat rows, but with a kind of order within the chaos, high and low, far and near, as if someone had casually scattered a handful of gold dust across a sheet of black satin. The lamplight reflected in the water, and as the water moved, the reflections shattered. The light from a single boat stretched across the surface into a long column, gently swaying like a candle burning beneath the water. After supper, the boatmen sat at the bow, not to chat, just to sit and watch the river flow past. Now and then, someone would hum a few notes. Not a proper tune, just an idle melody. No words, only the tune. The melody drifted across the water to the next boat, and someone on that boat picked it up for a phrase, then fell quiet again. The dogs on the boats stopped barking too. Several dogs lived on the wharf, running around all day, wagging their tails at everyone. At night, they curled up in the piles of burlap sacks at the bow, resting their chins on their front paws, eyes half shut, ears twitching now and then. Not because they heard anything, just out of habit. When the boats were anchored for the night, time on the river slowed to 1/10 of its speed. One lamp went out, then another. In the end, only the moon still shone. Midnight. All the boat lamps had gone out. The boatmen slept in their cabins, breathing deep. There was no light on the river. When the moon hid behind the clouds, the surface was a solid block of ink. When the clouds shifted, moonlight suddenly spilled down, illuminating the entire river. Not the brightness of day, but the cool, thin brightness of moonlight. The silhouettes of hundreds of sand junks emerged in the moonlight. The masts like very fine brush strokes, the curves of the canopies as gentle as the softest stretch of my riverbank. The wharf was empty. The patterns in the wood planks showed in the moonlight, line after line, like the palm lines of an old man. These planks had lain here for decades, trodden by so many bare feet, boatmen's, porters, merchants, children. Every soul carried a different warmth, and the wood remembered. At the very end of the wharf, a small boat was moored, its rope loosely tied to a stone block on the shore. The hull swayed gently with the water, not from the wind, but from the tide. The tide was rising. The water pushed slowly back from the Yangtze estuary, spilling over the mud flats, over the reed roots, over the wooden posts of the wharf. You can lie down. The planks are hard, but decades of river wind have worn them smooth, like stones polished by water. You press your ear against the wood. Right beneath the planks is the water, gently nudging the wood. That is not the sound of a boat. That is the port's own heartbeat. On the wharf at midnight, you listen. The muffled thud of water pushing against the posts. The soft friction of the mooring rope against a stone block. The low horn of a night boat far off at Wusongo. Every sound is very soft as the river dreaming. The tides care nothing for dynasties. The Tang ebbed, the Song flowed, the Yuan ebbed, the Ming flowed. The names of dynasties changed again and again, but the direction of the tides never changed. Twice a day they rise, twice they fall. For 1,300 years, 949,000 tides, I have counted. The wharf at Qinglong Town is gone. Silt buried it, and now it is a rice paddy. The wharf at Shanghai Town is gone too. New buildings were built on top of it. Built and torn down, and built again, layer upon layer. The wharf at Shiliupu is still there, but it is no longer made of wood. It is concrete and steel. The boats are no longer sand junks either. But the tides are still here, and the tides know nothing. They do not know the dynasties have changed. Do not know the boats have changed. Do not know the wharf's wood has turned to concrete. The tides only come and go, and come again and go again. The scent I smelled in the tides changed too. The Tang Dynasty tides carried the earthy smell of silt from the upper Yangtze. The Song Dynasty tides gained the cool bitterness of Fujian tea cakes. The Ming Dynasty tides bore the sour scent of dye from Songjiang cotton cloth. The tides do not care what happens on shore. War, peace, prosperity, decline. The tides only come and go, and come again, and go again. The moon does not care either. The moon only walks. The two of them are like a pair of very old friends, not speaking, but mating punctually every night. Now the night is deep, and the tide you smell has no scent. Just water, pure, cool, the very light scent of water. That is the tide in its truest form. You may wonder, where did all those sand junks go in the end? A boat does not live forever. Its hull wore thin against the sandbars. Its planks rotted from decades of soaking in the river. Its sails rotted away in the sea wind. The life of a sand junk, 20 years at best, 10 in hard times. When it grew old, the boatmen hauled it ashore and dismantled it. The planks, that wood soaked in river water for decades, hard and tough, would not rot, became the door panels and window frames of houses on shore. Some of the black wooden doors you see in the old town of Shanghai are made from the planks of sand junks. The masts became roof beams. The sails, the tattered canvas, became the awnings of shops. The anchors were buried in the earth as foundations. A boat's life is not so different from a person's. Riding the wind and waves in youth, returning with full holds in middle age, then in old age coming back to the place where it began, quietly dismantled piece by piece, but wood withstands time better than human bone. A century-old ship plank only grows harder with age, blacker, heavier. A sand junk does not truly vanish, it only lives on in a different form. The old boatman stopped sailing too. He opened a small shop near Shiliupu, selling things for boats, tung oil, hemp rope, iron nails. After closing up at night, it was his habit to walk to the river and sit for a while, listening to the water. He did not speak, and he did not need to speak. He was an old friend of mine. I just stood there, keeping him company, listening to the water. The river still flows. You have been lying on me for a long time now. Drifting from Qinglong Town in the Tang Dynasty all the way to Shiliupu in the Ming Dynasty, crossing 800 years of tides. The boats you saw have all gone. The tribute barges, the sand junks, the fishing boats, the ferries, some to Tianjin, some to Quanzhou, some sunk in a great storm. But a port does not grieve. A port never grieves. When boats leave, new boats come. When this generation grows old, New people are born on the wharf, walking barefoot on the planks, growing up to lift the punting pole of another boat. A port only waits. I do not rush. The tides have their own rhythm. The boats have their own time to return. Some boats take a very long time to come back. Perhaps not until the next time you close your eyes and lie upon me. The river is not in a hurry. It has already traveled a long way. From lake tide to here, around how many bends, over how many weirs. By the time it reaches me, it should slow down. You should slow down too. You have followed me all the way from the Tang Dynasty to here, through 800 years of tides. Your eyelids must be very heavy now. The water you hear now is slower than before. It is not your imagination. The ebbing tide is always slower than the rising tide, heavier, more like a person letting out one last long breath. The water carries you downstream. We are nearly at Wusanko, nearly at the end of your journey tonight. The tide is ebbing. The water draws back from beneath you, like a blanket gently pulled away. That sand junk has also passed the river mouth. Its sails already half furled, the hull growing smaller and smaller until it becomes a black dot, sinking into that thread of faint light where river meets sea. It will come back. All the boats will come back. Because the port is still here. Because the tide will rise again. It is the same with you now. You have drifted on me the whole night, from the oil lamp at Qinglong Town to the moonlight at Shiliupu. You have heard my breathing, twice a day, unceasing for 1,000 years. Now you give your breath to me. Let every exhale be like the tide receding. Let every inhale be like the tide rising back. I am not a city. I am the port. I stand by the water, and I have been waiting for you for 1,300 years. Tonight you have finally come. The water has receded far away, to the Yangtze, to the East China Sea, to places beyond your sight. Next time you close your eyes, the tide will bring all the boats back with it. I am still by the water. Good night. Last night, as the tide receded, the last sand junk anchored in the moonlight of Shiliupu. Tonight, the sea has come. Now, close your eyes. Salt water is heavier than fresh water. The sea creeps in along the riverbed like a silent guest, settling beneath the river without a sound. The surface of the river is still yellow, but beneath it there is already a layer of something blue-green and cool. Do you smell it? A different kind of scent. Not the muddy, earthy smell of the huangpu, but something broader, farther, carrying the taste of salt. That is the sea. The sea was never here before. Tang Dynasty, Song Dynasty, Ming Dynasty. For over 1,000 years, I was only a river port. My water was yellow. My docks were made of wood. My boats were sand junks. But tonight, a new current pushes upstream from the mouth of the Yangtze. It is not the color of yellow mud. It is blue-green. It is cold, much colder than the river water, like a hand reaching from a place very far away, pressing gently down on my riverbed. Do you feel it? Salty. For the first time, seawater has drifted up the Huangpu to Shiliupu. In that moment, I knew The sea is standing at my door. Close your eyes. Let this saltiness carry you into tonight's story. 1001 something. Something happened. The first steamship appeared on the Huangpu River. No sails, no oars, no boatmen pulling at the bow. A dark iron shell, like a panting iron beast. Thick black smoke pouring from its funnel. Chug, chug, chugging in from Wusongkou. Its funnel sprayed black smoke that spread a thin layer of gray across the river. Not fog, coal smoke, with a faint smell of sulfur. The boatmen on the sand junks had never smelled this kind of scent before. The sand junk workers on the docks all stopped what they were doing, stood at the shore, watching this thing that had come from beyond the sea. It was 5 times larger than the largest sand junk. Its draft so deep that the river water, pushed aside, formed 2 white waves that rolled all the way into the reed beds along the bank. The reeds were battered sideways by the waves, then slowly stood back up. The steamship's whistle sounded once, not the muffled tone of a sand junk's horn, but something sharp, sharp enough to pierce the river fog, carrying from Shiliupu all the way to Longhua. The dogs on the dock tucked their tails and ran. The children covered their ears and laughed. The old men stood far away watching, saying nothing. They knew something had already changed. Not today, but every day from now on would never be the same. From that day, the sea never left my docks again. Inside the customs house on the Bund there is a great clock. It has been chiming since 1928, every 15 minutes, never stopping. The chime is low and thick, and after each strike, the lingering tone drifts across the river for a long time, like the ripples after a stone is dropped into water. The clock's hands are not electric. An old master climbs up every week to wind it by hand. He spent 40 years in the clock tower. The calluses on his hands thicker than those of the dock workers. He does not need to look at a watch. He knows when it is time to wind. The rhythm of his body is his clock. During the day, the chimes are drowned out by the noise of the docks, the chants of the porters, the grinding gears of the cranes, the haggling voices of the merchants. But at night, when all the boats have unloaded their cargo and only a few night watchmen remain on the docks, the chimes emerge. Every 15 minutes, dong, the sound slowly spreads across the river, drifting all the way to the farmland of Pudong on the other side, drifting to the spire of Longhua Pagoda. But the whistles on the river travel even farther. A steamship's whistle can carry 8 kilometers. Late at night, a ship at Wusongkou sounds its whistle, and the sound travels upstream along the Huangpu, growing fainter and fainter, until by the time it reaches the Bund, there is only a very thin, very faint trailing note, like someone at the end of the river, letting out a soft sigh. The clock chime is polite, only once every 15 minutes. The whistle is willful. It sounds whenever it wants. The 2 sounds overlap in the night, one above, one below, like 2 parallel currents, never disturbing each other. The ships of all nations arrived. British steamships, their funnels painted with white shipping company logos, their hulls black, below the waterline coated with red lead anti-rust paint. French tall ships, 3 masts, cream-colored sails, and up close you could see the stitch lines in the canvas, row by row. American clippers, bows very sharp, like a knife cutting through the river. Japanese freighters, wooden crates stacked neatly on the decks, each crate marked with a Chinese character delivery address written in brush ink. Every ship flew its own flag at the stern, snapping in the river wind. The colors of those flags formed a shifting field of colored reflections on the water. Red, blue, white, yellow, breaking apart and coming together. Breaking apart and coming together. The sand junk boatmen found it fascinating at first. They had worked boats all their lives, never seen a mast that flew a colored flag instead of a sail. Eventually, they got used to it. They gave the foreign ships nicknames. The British ships they called black chimneys, the French ships white wings, the American ships fast knives. The sailors on the foreign ships learned a few phrases of Shanghainese too. 能好再会, 明早会, 靠会. They did not share a language, but hand gestures for bargaining on the docks were universal. Thumb up meant raise the price. Palm pressing down meant lower it. 5 fingers spread meant 5 won per piece.
The dock worker's shoulders are the thickest part of me. Sack after sack of raw silk, white, carrying a faint scent of silkworm pupae. Each sack 100 jin, transported from the silkworm houses of Sichuan, Zhejiang, Jiangsu, all the way to my docks, then from the dock workers' shoulders into the cargo holds, crate after crate of tea, Chimen red tea, Wu Yuan green tea, Wu Yu rock tea, the wooden crates pasted with English labels from foreign trading houses, each crate passing through 6 pairs of hands, the tea farmer's hands, the tea merchant's hands, the packer's hands, the porter's hands, the customs inspector's hands, and finally, the dock worker's hands.
Barrel after barrel of Tang oil, the barrels made of fir wood, the hoops woven from bamboo strips, the outsides of the barrels seeping a transparent sheen of oil. When dock workers carried Tang oil barrels up the gangplank, every step was careful, not for fear of dropping the barrel, but for fear of slipping. Tang oil splashed onto the gangplank, and the gangplank became too slick to stand on. Their shoulders bore a thick layer of calluses, not worn in over a day, but worn in over 10 years. In winter, the calluses would crack open, revealing lines of red flesh. They would stick a patch of plaster over the cracks and keep carrying. They carried from Chinese shoulders onto foreign ships. The raw silk went to the textile mills of Lyon. The tea went to the tea houses of London. The Tang oil went to the paint workshops of New York. Every piece of cargo, as it left behind an invisible ripple on the surface of the Huangpu. I saw it. In the 1930s, I was the busiest port in all of the Far East. Over 100 ocean-going ships were anchored on the Huangpu at the same time. Funnels as dense as a black forest. Tall ones, short ones, thick ones, thin ones, some painted with red and white stripes, some all black. The smoke rising from those funnels formed a gray shroud above the river, and the sunlight passing through that shroud became a kind of warm gray light. Whistles rose and fell, one after another. Not the thin sound of sand junk horns, but deep and resonant, the kind that could vibrate through your chest. Every whistle was a ship saying, "I am entering the port," or "I am leaving the port." A port has its own language, and the whistle is my language. During the day, the docks were crowded with people like ants, porters, stevedores, crane operators, customs officers, shipping agents, cigarette vendors, shoeshine boys. Their footsteps on the concrete docks merged into a constant hum, as unceasing as the tides of the Huangpu. The dust on the docks was black, coal ash, rust, grease, mixed together, settling on people's shoulders, on the cargo, on the river water. The surface of the Huangpu was no longer just the color of yellow mud, now carrying a thin sheen of oil. When night came, most ships cut their engines, the funnels stopped smoking, the whistles fell silent. But the dock cranes kept turning. The night shift workers unloaded the remaining cargo, their work chants sounding especially clear, especially lonely, across the empty docks. The customs house clock struck 12. Midnight had arrived. There was no one left in the farmland of Podong, and the lamp on Longhua Pagoda had gone out. The rows of lit windows in the Bund's international buildings also dimmed one by one. First the fourth floor, then the third, then the second. Finally, only a few street lamps remained lit along the dock, their shades made of tin, the light spilling out from beneath them, painting warm yellow circles on the ground. On the dock, it was just him and the river now. The river flowed at his feet, its voice clearer than during the day. Not because there were fewer boats, but because he finally had ears to listen. He had been busy all day, and only in this moment did the river belong to him alone. The last ship had finished unloading. The cargo hatch covers were closed. The sailors on deck had coiled up the mooring lines. The grinding of crane gears stopped. The steel arms of the crane slowly lowered, like great birds folding their wings. The Huangpu returned to silence. But floating on the surface was a thin film of oil. Oil leaked from the steamships, an extremely thin, nearly transparent layer of color, reflecting a rainbow-like sheen in the lingering glow of the dock lamps. The oil slowly dispersed, slowly spread, becoming one large patch, then carried by the ebbing tide out past Wusongkou, into the Yangtze, into the sea. The dock workers sat on the mooring bollards smoking, the red glow of their cigarettes flaring and fading in the dark. He did not speak. I did not speak either. We sat like that for a long time. Back then, I did not yet know that nights like this would not last much longer. War came. The dock cranes stopped turning for many years, not because they were broken, but because no one came to operate them. The iron ships left, British, French, American, Japanese. In a single night, they all weighed anchor and sailed out past Wusongkou, never to return. The whistle sounds vanished. The customs house clock still chimed, but chiming over the empty river, it carried many more echoes now. Grass grew on the docks, not the pretty kind, but foxtail grass, pushing up through the cracks in the concrete, bending over whenever the wind blew. The wooden boats came back, not sand junks, but small sampans, the kind a single person could row. What the sampans carried was no longer raw silk and tea, but firewood and sacks of rice. The people on the docks grew fewer, and the sounds grew fewer too. My river surface suddenly became very wide, not truly wider, but with no boats. The water looked especially vast, especially empty. I was silent for many years, not because I wanted to be silent, but because the docks were empty. What a port fears most is not wind and waves, but emptiness. Empty docks, empty river, empty cranes. In those years, I learned a different way of breathing. Not the rhythmic, expectant breathing of the tides, but a very shallow, very cautious breathing, like someone afraid of waking something. But the water kept flowing. The Huangpu does not care what happens above. The water just flows from Lake Tai toward the Yangtze without stopping for a single day. Later, the ships came back. Not all at once, one by one, slowly, like family members long scattered, pushing open the door one after another. First came the small cargo boats, then the larger freighters. No longer steamships now, but diesel engine ships. The sound was different, no longer that chugging, panting noise, but a deeper, steadier hum. The docks were rebuilt, wooden piles replaced with concrete ones, wooden planks replaced with steel plates. The dock workers were a new generation too. Many of the old generation never lived to see the ships return. They spent their whole lives on the docks, and when they closed their eyes, the river was still empty. When the younger generation took the carrying poles from their hands, the bamboo joints had been worn glossy smooth. One carrying pole used by 3 generations, the bamboo's color shifting from green to yellow, from yellow to brown, from brown to black. The younger generation did not yet have calluses on their shoulders, but they carried cargo in exactly the same posture as their fathers. A pole laid across the shoulder, both hands steadying the ends, knees bent low, center of gravity settled and sure. Among the first cargo to return to the docks were soybeans from the northeast, peanuts from Shandong, tea from Shengguang, tea from Shengguang. The tea crates still bore pre-war labels, the characters already blurred. When the dock workers carried them aboard, their movements were very gentle, as if the crates contained not tea, but the whole Shanghai from before the war. A ship sounded its whistle and slowly pulled away from the dock. That whistle, to me, was more reassuring than the customs house clock. It meant the docks were alive again. As long as there is a whistle, the port is alive. The container arrived. The docks no longer needed hundreds of workers to carry cargo. One crane plus one operator could lift 40 tons at a time. But the quiet of a container terminal is not the same as the quiet of a sand junk dock. The quiet of the sand junk dock was the quiet of people. The quiet of the container terminal is the quiet of machines. Standing in the middle of a container yard, surrounded by iron boxes, iron crane arms, iron rails. Even the river wind, when it hits the iron, makes a sound that is cold. This is the quietest thing in the history of ports. An iron box, 40 feet long, 8 feet wide, 8.5 feet tall. The colors are muted, deep blue, dark green, rust red, smoky gray. They are unloaded from the decks of giant ships one by the cranes. The movements very slow, very steady, almost soundless. What you can hear is the crane's motor, a very low, very faint electric hum, not a roar, just a buzzing, like a large bee shut inside a box very far away. The crane's operator cabin sits at the top, more than a dozen stories above the ground. The operator sits inside alone, the glass in front of him misted over by the river fog. He uses the joystick to lower the crane arm, a 40-ton iron box, in his hands like a kite, settling steadily onto the waiting truck trailer on the dock. There are no dock workers carrying cargo anymore. The sound of carrying poles and shoulders has vanished forever. There are very few people on the container terminal. So few you might think this is an abandoned city. But it is awake. The queen indicator lights blinking in the river fog. Warm orange, deep red, like a forest of glowing trees growing on the dock. The river fog is thick enough that you cannot see the Huangpu. You can only hear the water coming from deep inside the fog, very low, very low. The Huangpu was no longer deep enough. The giant ships grew larger and larger, their draft deeper and deeper. The largest ships needed 16 meters of water to float, and the deepest part of the Huangpu was only a little over 10 meters. So I moved the port into the sea. Yangshan. On a cluster of small islands, 32 kilometers from the shore, a deep water port was built. A 32-kilometer sea-crossing bridge connects the land to the islands. Driving across it at night, on both sides there is only black sea water, not the narrow river surface of the Huangpu, squeezed between two banks, but the real sea. No obstructions anywhere. Boundless, stretching to an invisible end. Only a row of bridge lamps, warm yellow, one every 50 meters, lined up neatly heading into the distance, growing smaller and smaller until they become a very thin, very fine golden thread vanishing into the sea fog. When you drive on the bridge, there is a strange feeling. It is as if you are not on a bridge at all, but flying over the surface of the sea. The bridge deck is over a dozen meters above the water, the wheels humming evenly against the road surface, and on both sides, the navigation lights of passing ships blink now and then. On a night at Yangshan Port, the sky and the sea are the same color, both a black so deep it carries a tinge of blue, and you cannot tell where the sky ends and the sea begins. Only the port lights glow in the distance, not a brilliant kind of brightness, but the white, cold, utilitarian brightness of construction site lights. Containers are stacked as high as mountains, and the cranes turn slowly atop the peaks of those mountains. The ocean giants are not like sand junks. A sand junk carries 100 tons. A giant ship carries 20,000 containers. A sand junk can be operated by a dozen people. A giant ship has over 20 crew members from 7 or 8 countries. The captain is Norwegian. The chief engineer is Filipino. The cook is Indian. A sand junk can dock right at the river bank. A giant ship has to anchor in deep water over 10 kilometers from shore, and a pilot boat carries the harbor pilot out to it. But no matter how big, no matter how advanced, all ships enter the port the same way, following the tide. Come in with a rising tide, go out with ebbing tide. This is exactly the same way the grain barges of Qinglong Town entered the port 1,300 years ago. The sound of a giant ship's bow splitting the seawater is also the same as a sand junk's. Not a splashing sound, but something lower, longer, like breathing in the dark. Only the giant ship's sound is 10 times deeper than the sand junk's. You can feel it standing on the shore, not heard with your ears, but transmitted through the soles of your feet. It is an extremely low-frequency vibration, passing through seawater, through the earth, through the concrete of the dock, all the way to your bones. Standing on the shore of Yangshan Port late at night, you can feel the most ancient thing and the most modern thing at the same time. The tide is still that tide. The breathing is still that breathing. The ships have changed, but the water beneath them has not. The port is also still that port. waiting for the tide to push the ships in, waiting for the tide to push the ships out. 1,300 years, my docks have hosted grain barges, sand junks, steamships, container giants. The wooden docks became concrete, and the concrete became steel structures. The shoulders carrying cargo on the docks changed generation after generation. Bare feet, straw sandals, liberation shoes, safety boots, but the tide remains. But if you listen carefully, not with your ears, but with your body, you will notice a small change in the sound of the tide. It is not the sound that has changed, it is your body that has changed. You have been drifting on me for 2 nights, and your body is lighter than when you first arrived. The rhythm of the tide has seeped into your muscles, your bones, the spaces between each heartbeat. You are about to become part of the tide. The tide remains. Twice a day it rises. Twice a day it falls, never stopping. No matter what kind of ship is anchored at my docks, they all follow the tide when entering the port. The grain barges entered under Tang Dynasty moonlight. The sand junks entered amid Ming Dynasty cooking smoke. The steamships entered to the sound of port opening whistles. The container giants entered through the sea fog of Yangshan. They all entered just as slowly, just as carefully, like someone returning to a home they have not seen for a very long time, their hand very light on the door. I am not Shanghai. I am the port. Shanghai only grew later, slowly. First the docks, then the warehouses beside the docks, then the shops beside the warehouses, then the houses beside the shops, layer by layer, like sediment brought by the tides slowly building up on my riverbed. I am a port that has stood by the water for 1,300 years, and Shanghai is only a city that grew on me. The tide is ebbing. You can feel it. The water retreating slowly, steadily, from beneath you. All the ships follow the tide out of my docks. The wooden sand junks, the iron steamships, the ocean giants with 20,000 containers. One by one, they recede into the darkness, smaller and smaller, their lights dimmer and dimmer, until finally, they become a faint point of light on the distant horizon. And then, even that point sinks away. The sea surface regains its wholeness, a black so deep it carries a tinge of blue. No lights, no ships, no wind, only the tide still breathing. 1,300 years, and the tide is still breathing. Twice a day it rises, twice a day it falls, never stopping. You rest your head on my tide, and gradually your breathing becomes the tide too. When you breathe in, the water pushes back from the distant deep sea. When you breathe out, the water retreats into a deeper darkness. You are not alone. You are lying on a port that is 1,300 years old. Before you, how many have fallen asleep this way? Boatmen, porters, merchants, travelers, children who grew up beside the docks, old men seeing the sea for the first time. Their breaths have mingled together, becoming the thickest layer of sediment at the bottom of my riverbed. You too are now part of that layer of sediment. Good night. The port will not leave. The tide will rise again. Next time you close your eyes, I will still be waiting for you by the water.